This was in Bloomberg, and they overemphasize free market forces, but the information in here is still really good, and I wanted to read this to you guys. No place in the U.S. has put inflation in the rearview mirror quite as fast as Minneapolis. Now, I'm more focused on like general cost of living increases going down and people being able to afford things like housing and healthcare, but inflation going down because of affordable housing initiatives is indicative of larger indicators that I think are important to point out. In May, the Twin Cities became the first major metropolitan area to see annual inflation fall below the Federal Reserve's target of 2%. Its 1.8% pace of price increases was the lowest of any region that month. That's largely due to a region-wide push to address one of the most intractable issues for both the Fed and American consumers: rising housing costs. We've talked about this on the show before, how while wages are increasing, it's not increasing at the same rate as things like housing and rent. In Minneapolis, though, they're starting to at least come up with some solutions that are working. Well before pandemic-related supply chain snarls and labor shortages roiled the economy, the city of Minneapolis eliminated zoning that allowed only single-family homes, and since 2018 has invested $320 million for rental assistance and subsidies. That helped unleash a boom in construction of apartments and condos in the region that proved to be a powerful antidote against inflation, given that the cost of shelter accounts for more than a third of the overall U.S. Consumer Price Index. Minneapolis shelter prices were up at half of the nation's annual pace in May. And then you can see here at this chart right below, you see how Minneapolis metro residents spend lower share of income on rent compared to other comparable cities. The housing initiatives, including the Itasca project, an alliance of the business, philanthropic, and public sectors in the region pushing for at least 18,000 new housing units per year through 2030, have picked up where the Fed's monetary tightening leaves off, demonstrating the role state and local policies can play in curbing inflation. They also show how a regional economy can get a boost when politicians are able to temper opposition to new building, sometimes part of the not in my backyard or NIMBY movement. Local backlash has squashed projects from California to New York, where an ambitious plan by Governor Kathy Hochul to add about 800,000 units of housing over the next decade fell apart in April after resistance from suburban areas. Rent growth in Minneapolis since 2017 is just 1%, compared with 31% in the U.S. overall, according to the Pew Charitable Trust. Its share of affordable rental units and ratio of rent to income are better than most comparable U.S. metro areas. You can see in that graph below how much smaller the rent increases have been compared to other parts of the country, compared to the U.S. overall. This is just one of the approaches. If we scroll down to the part that starts with Curry Commons. Curry Commons is an 187-unit complex under construction in the Harrison neighborhood of North Minneapolis, where the poverty rate exceeds 30%. A quarter of the apartments will be reserved for those making less than 30% of area median income, or $35,500 for a family of four. The four-story property will include a roof deck with a view of the city skyline and blah, blah, blah. So that's a mixed housing initiative, which has proven to be in other experimentations, both not in the United States and in the United States, a pretty promising way forward to make sure that housing is more affordable. I think that we need more public housing in order to further tamp down rental properties, or rental prices, I should say. And some advocates also point to the fact that in Minneapolis, they also repealed the mandatory parking minimums for some of these developments, which basically allowed for a bunch of different projects to get greenlit because they didn't require all of the housing that would be necessary for a certain amount of cars. Just an example, when you drive down housing, you drive down inflation, you make places more livable, housing prices, I should say, and there should be more done, but this should be happening in every major city in America right now.
Well, I mean, this is the thing that I think our system is I'm more readily able to do, but it's, I think, half of the story. Like, Minnesota's put in $1 billion into housing in the recently they passed a bill for that, and a lot of this is helping people pay rent, helping people pay down payments and stuff like that. And I think that's really good, but also, like, St. Paul has a rent control ordinance. We're going to need to see things like this, because ultimately, I think when you see this kind of money flood the system, unless you have things like rent control, ultimately you're going to see like relief for people like we did during COVID. But then you will see, I'm worried you will see inflation without this. And from the Sahan Journal, which covers the Muslim community in Minneapolis, this is from June 28th. This year, Minneapolis City Council kills rent control with 3 Muslim members absent for Eid. The 3 Muslim council members who missed Wednesday's meeting say their vote to stop rent control was inappropriate, purposeful, and exclusionary, and they were all pro rent control. Like, and I think like I think it's great that like this the yes in my backyard stuff I think is really good, but I worry about like. I don't think you can just do that, because I ultimately think
Certainly.
like we're going to be, and I think like the St. Paul rent control stuff probably should be worth a mention too. Like that's keeping rent prices down in Minneapolis.
In the other parts of the state as well.
I mean, despite Minneapolis is getting, disemboweled.